You are live now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Salis. I'm the Chair of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee. And this morning our session is in public. It is a session that is going to be focused on Afghanistan, and I would like to welcome both the Minister of Foreign Affairs Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Nania Mahuta, as well as the Minister of Defence, the Honourable Peeni Henare. I will first of all go to the Honourable Nania Mahuta for a statement on Afghanistan, and I'd like at this time just to say that we are quite concerned about what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan, which is one of the reasons why we're having this public session so that we can ask our ministers and our officials some questions. Thank you, Honourable Nania Mahuta.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Firstly, can I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the New Zealand Government's response to recent events in Afghanistan. Members will appreciate that the Government's response was in line with Allied forces signalling the intent to exit Afghanistan on the 31st of August. I'll leave the New Zealand Defence Force deployment issues to Minister Henare and the Chief of Defence, and prior to handing over, I'll provide some context on the diplomatic, humanitarian, multilateral and consular issues given the complexity and international significance of our response. I'll be keeping my remarks unclassified and understand that there will be a range of issues that members will want to pursue questions on, and we want to ensure that the public have a good sense of the approach that we've taken to Afghanistan, returning those eligible, and also our ongoing humanitarian response. As members are aware, New Zealand's had a long-standing connection with Afghanistan and with the Afghan people. Our activities have spanned over 20 years, and we also have a vibrant Afghan community who contribute significantly to the fabric of our society. We'll recall that international forces were initially deployed to Afghanistan in 2001 under the UN Security Council mandate. The reasons for the UN mandated action was clear: the need to end Taliban's hosting of Al-Qaeda. There was also strong human rights rationale for taking action in Afghanistan. Girls had been banned from attending school, women prohibited from the paid workforce, and weekly executions were taking place at the Kabul football stadium, to name a few things. So our effort was to help create stability and prosperity in a country that after 20 years of civil war had become a failed state. But if we move more precisely to the exit from Afghanistan, we signalled earlier this year that alongside Allied forces we'd be withdrawing the last 6 New Zealand Defence Force personnel who were serving there. And I want to acknowledge the comments of the Opposition Foreign Affairs spokesperson Jerry Brownlee, who supported that withdrawal. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, the situation in Afghanistan has become increasingly fragile and dangerous, significantly so. Since the confirmation of the US withdrawal timeframes on July the 8th this year, we've seen a rapid deterioration of the political and security situation in Afghanistan as the Taliban took control. So if I outline, and I have provided to the committee more detail of my full statement, but to summarise, on the 15th of August, the Taliban entered Kabul. On the 16th of August, Cabinet agreed to the deployment of a New Zealand Defence Force C-130 aircraft and personnel to assist the evacuation from Afghanistan of New Zealand nationals, permanent residents and approved Afghan citizens with visas. What we also did was we agreed on the 16th of August that alongside New Zealand citizens, permanent residents and visa holders, Afghan nationals eligible for evacuation and resettlement assistance would be those who had worked with the New Zealand Defence Force, police, MFAT, or provided material assistance to the Operation Burnham inquiry. Assistance was also extended to the immediate family of those individuals. In this way, assistance was extended to those whose connections with New Zealand put them at risk due to the rapidly changed situation in Afghanistan. We were prepared with the high prospect of not being able to evacuate everyone who needed to be, who may have been eligible, and this was largely driven by the complex situation on the ground. The process of urgently giving effect to Cabinet's decision to enable resettlement of eligible Afghan nationals through the short window of evacuation operation has been a significant and complex multi-agency undertaking. MFAT, for example, stood up its Emergency Coordination Centre in Wellington, staff rostered on shifts to coordinate the whole of government response. Consular staff were also rostered on from our posts in Europe, ensuring 24/7 contact for those on the ground in Afghanistan and their families. At its peak, MFAT had 171 staff assigned to support the government's response. On the 17th of August, the system for processing requests for Afghan nationals for resettlement in New Zealand was stood up. This included advice on government websites for prospective applicants, a single government email address for submitting requests. Numerous requests came from a number of MPs across parliaments, and a coordinated interagency assessment and verification process for those requests according to the criteria agreed by Cabinet. MFAT provided the gateway for all the inquiries, and we worked alongside the Defence Force MB to be able to achieve that. By the 22nd of August, over 3,000 inquiries from Afghan nationals seeking resettlement had been received. By the end of the 25th, a number of inquiries received stood at over 8,000. However, our work isn't finished. We know that there are a number of New Zealand citizens and permanent residents who remain in Afghanistan. While we have extracted many, there are a number who remain in Afghanistan, and I know that the committee may wish to ask us questions about that. Our immediate priority for the initial evacuation was to ensure that the criteria that Cabinet applied was able to be informative in the way that the New Zealand Defence Force alongside Allied forces were able to undertake their role on the ground. However, again, I cannot stress enough the fact that we were unable to achieve the full extraction of everybody who was able to be extracted. At this point, I do want to thank Australia, in particular the United Arab Emirates, for their role in supporting our activity alongside other allied forces. Can I briefly move to the next phase of our support before handing over to Minister Henare? The next phase of our support will include assistance through humanitarian pathways. We've already announced a contribution of $3 million of humanitarian assistance to be able to support the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, as well as the International Committee of Red Cross for their work in Afghanistan, which includes efforts to ensure the protection of civilians and the provision of essential services including healthcare, water and sanitation. We continue to advocate with multilateral partners. On the 19th of August, we co-sponsored a joint statement with a wide group of international partners emphasising the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. At the UN Human Rights Council special session on human rights situation in Afghanistan on the 24th of August, we spoke of our deep concern about the deteriorating security and human rights situation in Afghanistan. We urged international partners to respect international humanitarian law, protect workers and civilians from harm, and support the right to freedom of movement. And on the 28th of August, we again co-sponsored a joint statement alongside international partners, noting our collective expectation that the Taliban will abide by its assurances that it will allow all foreign nationals and any Afghan citizen with a travel authorization to proceed to points of departure and travel outside of Afghanistan. But we know that the situation in Afghanistan remains uncertain. as evidenced by the explosions that have occurred, and we have conveyed our deepest sympathy to those US personnel who have lost their lives. We want to ensure that in the second phase of our response, we are able to work alongside multilateral partners, and this will be an important approach as we continue our effort. I also want to stress that as we have been able to extract some of those who are eligible back to New Zealand, some of the questions that members may have will be around our COVID-related considerations, as well as those aspects that will contribute to successful resettlement. As best we can, we will respond to those questions as well. So I'll pass the time over to Minister Henare.
Thank you, Minister Mahuta, Minister of Foreign Affairs. I move now to the Honourable Peeni Henare, the Minister of Defence, for his statement before we open it up for questions. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair, tēnā tātou katoa. I'd also like to acknowledge the opportunity provided to Minister Mahuta and myself today to speak to the recent events in Afghanistan. I welcome the interest of the public and the committee in the significant and complex developments in Afghanistan over the previous weeks. These are important issues and ones that will continue to impact the global community for months and years to come. Thank you, Minister Mahuta, for addressing the situation in Afghanistan and the overall New Zealand government response. I will speak to the New Zealand Defence Force deployment in support of the international military evacuation of civilians from Afghanistan. I have with me Chief of Defence Force Air Marshal Kevin Short and Secretary of Defence Andrew Bridgman on the call today. Can I offer my heartfelt thanks on behalf of all New Zealanders to all personnel who were deployed. As a direct result of their work and the efforts of the wider coalition, there are now close to 400 who will find a new and better life in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I know that New Zealanders will join with me in welcoming these people. Madam Chair, on 19 August, I and a group of ministerial colleagues whom Cabinet had appointed with powers to act for this operation approved the deployment of an NZDF C-130 Hercules aircraft and up to 80 NZDF personnel, some to operate on the ground at the Kabul airport and the remainder to be based out of an airbase in the United Arab Emirates. Can I also extend the thanks the Minister Mahuta has given to our friends of the UAE government in permitting the NZDF to operate from the UAE for this deployment. I spoke with my UAE counterpart last week and can confirm the close and meaningful defence relationship we have with the UAE. We had NZDF personnel on the ground at Kabul airport within 4 days of the ministerial decision to deploy our defence force to support the international efforts to evacuate and resettle civilians from Afghanistan. These personnel were able to get to work executing the instructions of MFAT and MV colleagues, which makes this truly an interagency effort. This is an exceptionally fast response, in my opinion, considering the complexity of the operating environment and the unfolding situation at the time. This demonstrates the high levels of training that NZDF maintains to deliver its primary output of military operations to the government and people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. During the deployment, Madam Chair, the NZDF C-130 Hercules and crew made 3 evacuation flights to and from Kabul airport, succeeding in evacuating a number of civilians from Afghanistan as part of the wider coalition effort. I also want to specifically commend the bravery, tenacity and resilience of our ground forces who operated from the heart of Afghanistan at the Kabul airport throughout the deployment. These personnel made an extremely valuable contribution. Of particular note are the outstanding efforts of our Special Forces personnel, including a female engagement team located at Kabul airport. This team made contact with approved evacuees and guided them through the crowds to points on the perimeter where they could be brought into the airport, secured and safely evacuated. The NZDF deployment concluded its operation out of Kabul airport on 26 August. The US had signalled that the military airlift would conclude by 31 August and that partners would need to depart days earlier than this, as the final days would be reserved for the US withdrawal of its significant numbers of personnel. The threat of terrorist attack was also a factor in the decision to conclude our activities out of Kabul airport when we did, as highlighted by the Prime Minister and the Chief of Defence Force in their media stand-up on this matter on Friday, 27 August. By that time, MFAT has advised people not to come to the Kabul airport. Sadly, that threat materialised in the early hours of 27 August New Zealand time, with the heinous act of terror perpetrated by the Islamic State in Khorasan province that we witnessed outside the Kabul airport mere hours after the NZDF presence had withdrawn. Can I reiterate the Prime Minister's statements on Friday in relation to this, that we condemn this despicable act on the innocent trying to flee for a better life and on those trying to escort them safely to their flight to freedom. New Zealand's thoughts and aroha with the families and civilians of US personnel and the rest who lost their lives. It is important to recognise the close cooperation and partnership as mentioned by the Minister of Defence. But I must especially recognise the true comradeship and partnership between our NZDF deployment and the Australian Defence Force deployment. We have jointly provided airlift for each other's evacuees, supported each other on the ground in Afghanistan and in the UAE, and we have benefited hugely from this cooperation. This deployment has shown that the Anzac spirit is alive and well. I'd like to reiterate both the words of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in my concluding remarks. The military-led evacuation effort from Afghanistan has now concluded. We were not the masters of this time frame, and we did all that we could do to evacuate people within the time frame that we had. I am saddened to hear of media reports indicating that we have been unable to evacuate all those whom we had sought to. We knew this was a risk given the short time frame of the international evacuation, and the Prime Minister mentioned this last week, and I know this is a weight that rests heavy on all the agencies who form part of the truly interagency New Zealand contribution to the Afghanistan international military evacuation. We are not turning our backs on those still in Afghanistan. We will continue to see how we can support these seeking to leave Afghanistan. However, that will no longer be a military-led effort which the NZDF will feature so prominently in. It will also be within a much larger international effort that New Zealand will be a part of. I look forward to welcoming the close to 400 people who have been successfully evacuated from Afghanistan, and finally, again acknowledging the bravery and service of our Defence Force personnel who have conducted this deployment under incredibly difficult circumstances. I know that I speak for all New Zealanders when I state how proud I am of them and what they have done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister Henare, for your opening comments. We're now open for questions from our members who are usually members of this committee. And can you please raise your hand virtually using the little hand signal on your computers? And if you can't raise your hand virtually, please physically raise your hand. I will go for the first question now to the Deputy Chair of this Select Committee, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Well, firstly, thank you to the two ministers for being on this Zoom arrangement today and for the opening comments that you've made. Look, we obviously appreciate the enormity of the task that NZDF had to undertake at what appeared to be relatively short notice. But one question I'd have to put to you is, and I put this question because a good number of MPs are being contacted by Afghan families here in New Zealand. There was a group of former NZDF personnel who worked with local people here, but also with people back in Afghanistan who they worked with when they were on their deployments, to identify 43 families that were previously apparently unknown to any of the current system, but definitely known to those individual New Zealanders when they were serving NZDF personnel. None of them have got out. So the first question in relation to that is, why did the ministries not have a list of people who had assisted in the deployment in Afghanistan over those years, who could have been eligible for the early issue of visas to enable them to make one of those repatriation flights?
I'll ask Chris Seed to start, and if the, I think in the first instance.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mr. Brownlee, for the question. I think it's the case that, so there are a number of elements I would points I would make. The first is that when the New Zealand PRT left Bamiyan, as part of that departure, a package of assistance was provided to a number of people who had worked for and supported the NZDF at the time. They were loosely called interpreters, although there were some people with other skills who were brought out under that package, which was agreed and worked through by the government at the time, and the criteria for it was quite clearly defined. In the period since, there have continued to be a number of applications from people who believe that they met the criteria. My understanding is that of the process is that those who didn't, who were judged by the Immigration Service not to meet the criteria, were obviously were not provided with visas. In terms of keeping lists, the PRT was obviously on the ground for the best part of a decade. The New Zealand aid program was there for all of that time. They expended something in the order of 100+ million in various projects around Bamiyan, across multiple projects with multiple contractors, with multiple third parties involved. Clearly the idea that we would collate and collect lists of every person that any of those projects came into contact with is, simply wasn't the way we operated, and it wasn't tenable. So when this crisis developed so quickly as it did in Afghanistan, there were no existing lists of people who, either under the previous criteria or under the criteria agreed by Cabinet on the 16th of August, there were no lists that people that we could go to, and that is why we required, applications in effect from people, and were then able to try in 4 or 5 days to make judgments about whether they met that criteria. Thank you.
So how were then the 400 who either have come to New Zealand or on their way to New Zealand qualified?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
But how have the people who have got out, the 400 that Minister Henare spoke of, been qualified?
So there were a number of categories. So there were a number of people who were citizens, who were permanent residents, or were the family members of those citizens and permanent residents who were in Afghanistan. That is, before the crisis, they already had the rights to come to New Zealand. So to give you an example of how quickly that list grew, on I think it was something like the 11th of August, our figures show that we had 11 citizens and a small number of other permanent residents who were registered with us on safe travel. So that is people who already had a right to come to New Zealand, absent the crisis. By the 2 weeks later, so by the 26th, that number had grown to 767. And what that demonstrates, I think, is that there are numerous reasons why people do or don't list on safe travel. Sometimes it's because they've been long based there, that they consider their home there. They're not thinking about their any return to New Zealand. I think it also speaks to the speed with which the situation developed in Afghanistan. Sometimes people, we're sure that sometimes we have people registering on our safe travel because it's a voluntary system. We have people registering who actually don't, may not have the right. So those numbers could grow because some people are putting their names forward when they don't actually have an entitlement to come to New Zealand. We're sure that there are people who, simply felt that their circumstances were sufficient in Afghanistan up until the collapse, that they sort of saw their long-term future there. So as I say, the big number of people grew very, very quickly, and it reflected that the fact that it grew in that way also demonstrated that a lot of the people who had come to New Zealand in the preceding years, some had returned and many had established sort of family connections back in Afghanistan and were looking to have their families come to New Zealand and had been applying through normal processes and indeed had visas issued, even though those people had not until mid-August decided to take up the visa which had been registered against their name.
Simply
Thank
put,
you.
though, simply put, when Cabinet decided on stating out the criteria, that absolutely put a fine light and sent a signal to either those who were in New Zealand and saw that their families were eligible, or those who were in Afghanistan who then saw that the criteria was widened to the extent that they were eligible. That absolutely did contribute to the surge that's been referred to by Chris.
Thank you, Minister Mahuta and Chris Seed. I wonder, Jerry Brownlee, I'll give you one more supplementary question and then I'll go through to the other members who might have questions and then I'll come back to you. But go ahead with a final supplementary on this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the range of questions that people want to ask. That commentary, Mr. C, would indicate that there are people still in Afghanistan who do hold New Zealand visas. There is, we're told that 43 families I spoke of before who are going to be issued, I'm told, New Zealand visas on Monday. Sometime this week. And the question would be, what's the ongoing communications that either New Zealand Defence Force or Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade is with the new administration in Afghanistan that might enable those people to peaceably leave the country?
Thank you. If I can come to you, Chris Seed, Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Brownlee, there are definitely a number of people who are registering as New Zealand citizens or permanent residents, and people to whom we've issued visas who are still in Afghanistan. We think the figure is probably we suspect it's over 300 or so. We are doing a number of things. So we continue to be in touch with many of those people via Safe Travel. We continue to ask them to register their details on Safe Travel. We continue to, we will be setting up a portal where people probably go up this afternoon, where people who have been issued visas in the period since the 16th are able to register their details. We're continuing to work with and to cooperate and coordinate with a range of international partners about what this phase 2 might be in terms of citizens and others, visa holders who remain in Afghanistan and who do still wish to leave. We continue to talk to regional countries about to what extent they are going to allow people to travel across their borders, and we continue to talk to message along with other partners to the Taliban that there's an expectation that they will meet their commitment of safe passage for people who are citizens of like New Zealand citizens, or who have a right of abode in another country, to allow them safe passage, which they have promised. But I think the point's been made to them that their actions will speak louder than words.
No direct contact. No direct contact.
Not us with the Taliban, no.
No, but our efforts in this second phase will be critically aligned to multilateral partners because we all share the same ambition. We have nationals to get out, those who are visa holders and eligible under the criteria that the government expressed on the 16th of August. We will do as much as we can directly with those who are registered on safe travel, as we had done prior to the emergency evacuation process and through that period. But it's a very complex situation on the ground. We are very mindful that the safety of even safety of getting people to an extraction point to be evacuated is somewhat precarious at this moment. Again, I just want to underscore what Cressida said, is that we remain connected to those who we have contacts for, and we are working with multilateral partners to ensure that there is a plan around the safe extraction of those who are still in Afghanistan. We are calling on the Taliban for safe passage for this next period, and again, it's a changing environment and very complex set of situations to deal with.
Thank you, Minister and Cressida. Our next question is from Golriz Garaman.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and kia ora to both of the ministers that have come in, and a huge thank you to you both for making yourselves available, also for your work thus far, and especially to the Defence Forces. I know it's been a precarious situation. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. One is just to clarify on the topic of Jerry's questions. There has been a group of interpreters that work directly with NZDF who I know for sure were known to at least us through my office, having advocated for them over the past couple of years through different ministers as immigration changed and as the government has changed, but certainly this year as well. Certain of them have, because we're in direct contact with them, have been left behind. Others have made it out. I just wonder if we could get some clarity around why the interpreters, having been trying to get out, we know the Taliban presence was very much live even before now throughout Afghanistan, and flare-ups happened over time, why they weren't brought back much earlier. And just leaving that to one side, because that will obviously go to defence. I do have a question for the Honourable Nania Mahuta, and I acknowledge that your efforts have been limited by the Cabinet decision on who we will evacuate, and that was very, very limited compared to who our allies and like-minded nations have chosen to evacuate. But now, just today, or as of last night, there's been a UN resolution calling very strongly on the Taliban to honour their commitments to allowing free movement of people out of Afghanistan. That will mean foreign nationals as well as Afghans. I wonder if we could get a commitment from you as Minister to work on expanding those categories that Cabinet agreed to, in particular to evacuation of family members of Kiwi Afghans, who we all know have been desperately advocating for their family members, and in particular also to a category which will be Afghans who are at particular risk of Taliban oppression and violence. So that will be human rights defenders, journalists, women in particular. I know the International Commission of Women Judges, which is chaired at the moment by our Justice Glazebrook, who's a Kiwi judge, has called for women judges and lawyers to be prioritised. So I wonder if we'll do something akin to what Canada and Australia have done, and with your leadership as Minister, taking this back to Cabinet to establish, a new category and numbers that New Zealand will actually resettle to acknowledge the real risk. And in terms of, I know that will be contingent on the Taliban allowing us to take people. If they don't, I wonder if you could address what we're doing about people who have made it over the border into Pakistan, for example, and whether we can still establish those new categories beyond what Cabinet has agreed to and start to take people who have now been displaced outside of Taliban-controlled borders.
Thank you for those two questions. If I can go first to the Minister of Defence, who hasn't had a turn at answering questions this morning, to answer the first question, and then I'll come for the second question to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and her officials. Thank you, the Honourable Peeni Henare. Sorry, if you can unmute first, please, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. I'll start with a brief answer before possibly handing to the Chief of Defence Force. So with respect to the list of interpreters, I want to make it clear that as we looked at the eligibility criteria in the recent activities undertaken by the New Zealand Defence Force to evacuate people, the eligibility criteria as agreed by Cabinet did change, which saw a number of others become eligible, if you like, for resettlement. And I want to make that clear because not all of them were interpreters. There were others under the new eligibility criteria that looked at engineers, mechanics and others who supported the work of the New Zealand Defence Force in our time there. But I'll hand over now, if it's okay, to the Chief of Defence Force.
Thank you, Minister. For the committee, when we did the original resettlement, and this is at a time that the PRT was wrapping up in 2012, all interpreters were offered a resettlement. The alternative to that was actually the equivalent of 3 years' salary to relocate where they wanted to go. 21 interpreters accepted that resettlement back into New Zealand and their dependents. So there were choices for that particular group. The reason it was that group was that they were out on the patrols with our men and women in uniform, and so they were the face, if you like, of some of the PRT wherever we went through Birmingham province. The locally employed staff, which when I say that, that's the engineers, the mechanics, the cooks and the cleaners that worked on the camp, were not part of that original offer, and it's that group which is coming forward now.
Thank you. I go now to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Chris Seed.
Thank you for the question. And prior to this emergency evacuation, there were a number of visas already in the pipeline from those who are in third-party countries seeking to come to New Zealand. And much, as you know, much of New Zealand's approach to the resettlement of refugees is done in line with the UNHCR. That remains the process as of present. You called upon me to I guess, re-put or refine the criteria that had been set by Cabinet on the 16th of August, and I'm not in the position to do that. What that set of criteria was enabled to achieve was focus on the first phase of our challenge, which was alongside the exiting of Afghanistan, alongside Allied forces, that we had a broader set of criteria than those that were applied in 2013 to enable the consideration of bringing back New Zealand citizens, permanent residents and visa holders for that emergency evacuation. Now, within that group, as I said in my opening statements, we have not been able to exit and extract everyone who was eligible. So we remain committed in the first instance to ensure that we have a plan around that, and we've already covered those issues. The other point that you raised was around our ongoing advocacy with allied partners, international partners around safe passage. We continue to do that, and we continue to seek within the multilateral context further understanding of what countries, what approach countries are taking to their second phase. And there is a second phase for those countries and for New Zealand as well. I would say that this is a further piece of advice that Cabinet has sought from myself and Minister Whāwhoi in terms of an approach. We're not at the point yet to be able to articulate what that is, as information is still being compiled to be able to present a Cabinet with the second stage of a response.
Sorry, can I just clarify what that advice is that Cabinet is? So is that a piece of advice from yourself and Minister Whāwhoi on the next phase of who we can take out of Afghanistan? Is that
yes,
right?
Yes, Cabinet's asked for further information around the second phase of a response in relation to Afghanistan. But, you know, can I be really clear? Our first priority was in this initial set of people who were covered by the 16th of August criteria. That's been our first commitment.
And I absolutely take your point, and that is as it should be. Just to clarify on that piece of advice, would I guess in terms of your understanding, would what Cabinet has sought advice on include potentially advice from yourself and Minister Whāwhoi on the potential for New Zealand to commit to something akin to what Canada, UK, Australia have committed to, which is something like a number? So Australia taking 5,000 at risk, Afghans, Canada committing to 20,000. Would, in your understanding, would that be something akin to that be included in what Cabinet has asked for? And would you consider including advice on what that might look like in terms of what we do for people outside of the core group, which I understand you have to prioritise in terms of the last Cabinet decision? Is that what you foresee as us looking at next?
Look, understanding that we are working with multilateral partners around the challenge we all have around the immediate exiting and extraction of our nationals and what they are doing in this area and what we would do alongside them. Certainly we will take on board what other countries are doing, but the advice is very much for Cabinet to understand what are the challenges of a second stage set of approaches towards resettling refugees, and what are the implications for New Zealand. So very much a New Zealand focus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We have a supplementary question from Ibrahim Omar, and then I'll go to Simon O'Connor for his question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a sub, but also slightly a bit different question. My question is that while the world is being focused on evacuating the people who supposed to be out of Afghanistan, and there are also millions of Afghans now are either internally displaced or in need of immediate humanitarian assistance. I know that New Zealand has already provided this $3 million. Are you planning, Minister, to work alongside with other countries, donors, to provide further assistance? Because at this stage, while we all focus on evacuating people, but people also are starving in Afghanistan as we speak now. Are we gonna work on furthering the humanitarian assistance by putting hands with other countries, but also potentially even rallying other countries to provide more assistance to the people of Afghanistan?
I think we can be confident as New Zealanders that we've always stepped up to the challenge of acting responsibly and providing humanitarian support in complex situations. The thing I want to stress is that this is a complex situation, and while we may, with all the willingness in the world, be open alongside partners to provide more humanitarian aid, we have to be assured that when we distribute the aid, it is able to get to who we design have designed the aid support for. And those are the assessments in Afghanistan under the current conditions that we have to make. I think New Zealand sent a very early signal by its initial support of humanitarian aid that we knew that there was still work to do, and that there was a level of commitment, again, alongside other countries to do our part. And it is alongside other countries. But I cannot stress enough the importance of assuring ourselves that on the ground we are able to work through organisations way to deliver the aid to who it needs to get to. I mean, ever since we lost our embassy in Kabul in 2014, we don't have the intelligence on the ground that we used to have to be able to make those determinations. So now we have to work in a multilateral sense around a broader set of knowledge around the way in which aid agencies are able to undertake their role.
Thank you, Minister. Simon O'Connor, we come to you for your question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Firstly, to the respective ministers and your teams, thank you, and acknowledge you, Chris, and the MFAT team, CDF, and to ComJ and the wider crew, enormous efforts. I suppose it's a question in two parts, and it's awkward because, again, we're in public, so how you want to answer it, but I'm interested on the military side of things of what, if any, intelligence or insights you had about the imminent collapse. And whether or not there were plans in place to be able to extract, or whether or not you were under the pump and designing this, if you will, on the fly. You guys are good at that as such, but I'd be interested to know, were there existing plans around extractions from Hakea and so forth, or did you have to do it on the fly? And I probably, as part of that, would want to know that no discussions have been had directly with the Taliban. And then on the immigration front, a good discussion there. There are some New Zealanders I know who've brought family members out who are now on critical purpose visas coming to New Zealand. There's sort of a bit of a sense of what's going to happen to them because they don't fit the criteria, strictly speaking. Will they get to stay in New Zealand, or will their eligibility have to be tested? And then if it's not pushing it too far to understand, Golriz has touched on it. A number of us are working with families here who are trying to get extended family to New Zealand. What's the advice for them at the moment? So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank the member for the question. I'll offer just a brief comment before handing to the Chief of Defence. For my part at this end, a continual communication loop was active 24/7 between myself, the Prime Minister, other ministers with powers to act, as well as the Chief of Defence Force and a number of other key officials that are on this call. So that was for my part with respect to the incoming and ongoing intelligence that was coming into the country. I'll hand to CDF to talk about the part from the operations.
If I first of all look at the intelligence, we were getting regular, and what I mean by regular, some of it was daily updates about what was happening in Afghanistan, and that was through the Five Eyes arrangement, which we have. But that daily intelligence was showing the fall of some districts and provinces, and the acceleration of that. However, both the US and other nations believe that Afghanistan capital would not collapse in a hurry, as Afghan forces were, if you like, withdrawing from some of the provinces back into protecting the capital. What no one predicted was the absolute collapse of the Afghan military itself. The US were looking at NEO operations in early August and had started that process by mid-August. And as you know, we actually had the cabinet decisions made mid-August as well. So it did catch out everyone. The last intelligence I saw the week before, this is the week of around the 8th of August, said that the country wouldn't collapse if all things went the wrong way for another 60 to 90 days. I do want to say that the intelligence sharing amongst nations for what ISIS-K was doing was shared, and it was for that reason we were able to predict when a attack from terrorists would occur and be able to make sure that we kept our people safe. And I know that MFAT put out messages to stay away from the airport at the time. So to me, there were quite a few factors being brought together at once. But I can tell you that with all the hundreds of thousands of troops that were trained, the military equipment that was given, the support that was given over many decades, no one thought the Afghan military would collapse as quickly as it did.
Thank you, Air Marshal Kevin Short and Minister Henare. I go now to the next question from the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, but I do want to indicate to Dr. James McDowell from the ACT Party that you're most welcome to ask a question if you'd like to raise your hand virtually. Thank you. Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, when you were talking about the numbers earlier, the number that sort of seemed to come into play there was just from looking through things here, about 770 odd residents and citizens and their families who registered on the website, the Travel Safe website. Question is, how many of those are among the 400 who's got out? Second part is, how many Afghans who are not residents, not citizens, but who do qualify under the government's new arrangements were also known. So what are we looking at as a total number? Given that a lot of us in our electorates are dealing with people who have these connections, and most notably the group that's run out of Christchurch here with, as I said before, 43 families. I know that other members, Erica Stanford, for example, has examples of families out of Auckland who have connections in there. And it seems to me that we know a lot about these, but what is the total number? So firstly, of the nearly 770 that you spoke of, how many were citizens or residents? And of the total 400 who came out, how many were actually Afghans who met the criteria?
Okay, I go now to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, probably is the best placed to answer this question. I go to Chris Seed of the Foreign Affairs.
Thanks, Mr. Brownlee. Let me provide the numbers that I've got, which were current to this morning, about 0800, but just with the caveat that these numbers do move around. They move around for the range of reasons I put before about some people do register, some people may have left the country, prior, and we're still trying to track that down. The circumstances on the ground, both in the UAE, where various countries were carrying people out, including our people. So we're, having to get our arms around or understand who might have been carried out by others, as well as a number of people who have made their exit to other countries. So we have a number of people we know that are in and elsewhere in the Middle East. We know, for example, a family separately, which has managed to get itself on a commercial route a few days ago out to Africa, somewhere in Africa. We know that a couple of families have been carried to Europe. So there's a bit of, the numbers are moving around. Our focus has been on ensuring that when we're on the ground, we were getting out people who had a right to come to New Zealand as quickly as possible. But the numbers that I have, the total number of potential consular cases was 737, of which there was a group of New Zealand citizens and permanent residence holders, so which is a round number of about 200. The rest then made up of various other visa holders. We think we know that 372 have departed from Afghanistan. So of the 740 odd 372 have departed Afghanistan, and we think there might be 365 still in the country. And of those 51, the best of our knowledge, 51 are identified as New Zealand citizens and 52 as New Zealand permanent residents. And of course, the fact that people have put themselves on our list, consular list, doesn't necessarily mean that they are looking to leave. I would make that point as well. But also so those numbers are those are the best numbers I have this morning at 8 o'clock. But they will continue to move around. Thank you.
Can I just say in addition to that is that the numbers that we really want to be focusing on for successful resettlement are those who arrive here in New Zealand, because understanding that the process still requires verification according to the criteria that we're setting, which is why Chris Seed has said those numbers are likely to change, because we have to still undertake the expectation that has been set by Cabinet that we verify and go through a process to do that. So I just want to caveat, we're not trying to fudge any numbers, except to say that there's that work being undertaken in terms of those who find their own way to third-party countries. That might again shift, and then the type of eligibility will be something that will be shifting a little bit as well.
Thank you, Minister Mahuta. I just wanted to remind our committee that we have 5 minutes left of this session. Go ahead, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Well, I wasn't trying to suggest anything other than get a handle on how big the immediate obligation New Zealand might have to citizens and residents inside Afghanistan at the moment, plus those who help New Zealand over a period of time. It seems to me those numbers aren't so astronomically large that we can't accommodate them. But the process of getting them out quite clearly is going to be difficult, no question about that, but it's encouraging that some efforts will continue. So my final question would be, of those, with all due respect, Minister, who are being qualified once they're here, is it really any likelihood that they'll be sent back?
Thank you, Jerry Brownlee. And given the time, can I give this opportunity, while you're thinking of the answer to the Honourable Jerry Brownlee's question, to Dr. James McDowell of the ACT Party to ask his question, and then the ministers can answer both at the same time. Thank you, James McDowell. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. I had a few questions, but I'll just focus on a couple. Following the terrorist attack on the airport by Daesh, was there any discussion to continue with the final evacuation flights, particularly because we've got people on the ground still, or was it already decided that if an attack took place, as per the intelligence, that they would stop? So that's my first question. I'll just add on to that. Look, we've got 37 interpreters at least who now hold critical purpose visitor visas but can't get out of the country. And that comes with a border exemption to New Zealand. So what advice has been given to them other than a general statement that we're not turning our backs on them?
Thank you. I come to both of you, Ministers Mahuta and Minister Henare, and your officials.
Well, I'll ask the question that was put by the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, which was once those who have been extracted and exited from Afghanistan, once they get here, then it's our obligation, yes it is. And we are thinking through the flow through impacts of successful resettlement and what that then means, which is why, again, our immediate priority on the first phase response does not stop with being able to bring people out of Afghanistan. It's actually bringing back to New Zealand and then successful resettlement. There are a whole lot of flow-through issues that we want to assure ourselves that we are caring responsibly for as we work through the second stage and what the implications of that will be.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, Minister Henare?
Not to that particular question, Madam Chair, but with respect to Dr. James McDowell's question, perhaps CDF, with respect to the threats of terror, might be able to answer more clearly that question. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead with your answer to that second part of his question, if you like.
The We actually had 2 further flights planned along with the coalition to operate into Afghanistan. But what we were seeing is the withdrawal of the medical support that was being provided at Kabul airport. Some of the gate controls were being closed because of the crowding and security issues. The evacuation handling systems were shutting down as well. And in fact, we needed the Australian support for that and also the threat. So the combination of all of those meant that we withdrew with our people and we went back to UAE. And of course, we looked at whether or not there was a possibility of going back. But on the advice of those that were still operating, they said they were also looking at withdrawing. And to give you the Americans' view, they needed 4 days to do their shutdown and they wanted to be given the space. So it was only the UK and the US that continued primarily after that. What happened was 8 nations completed their missions on the 26th, which is when we finished and the Australians finished. Another 4 withdrew on the 27th, which included the hospital, and the UK and the USA finished, in fact, midnight last night.
If the attack didn't happen, would we have done the final 2 flights?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for those answers. And can I at this time, given that we're at the end of our session, thank both the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Nania Mahuta, the Minister of Defence, the Honourable Peeni Henare, as well as Chris Seed from Foreign Affairs and Air Marshal Kevin Short from Defence. Thank you also to all of our MPs who are members of this select committee, as well as others who joined us, and all of the officials. Can I also at this time thank all of you officials, especially the ones on the ground in Afghanistan and the ones here in New Zealand assisting our New Zealanders to get back. And we wish you all the best as you try out your very hardest, I'm sure, to get the rest of our New Zealanders and Afghan people with visas back here to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm sure that we will come to you for further questions in the future, but for today, thank you so much for your time. And if I can just remind our committee members that we still have at least about